Hello everyone. Good afternoon.
Hello everyone. Hi.
Hey everyone.
Good afternoon.
Hello everyone, good to see you all. Good afternoon.
Ravi, you're on mute.
Yeah. Good afternoon everyone. We are here for a webinar on navigating appraisal season. Uh, I believe we can wait for some more time for some more attendees to join in. If we can just get a hi from people who have joined in the live chat. Good to see so many people joining in. All right. So I guess we can get started. Everyone?
Sure.
Yeah. So good afternoon, everyone. I am here today, joined in by Aman from MPL, Anuj from Lenskart, and Joel from Esper. Anuj, Aman, Joel, can you please just introduce yourselves shortly for our audience? Uh, please go ahead, Joel.
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Joel and I lead the HR function for Esper. Esper is a startup and we are into Android device management. Been in this field for like 15 years now, and yep, that's about it. And looking forward to chatting and interacting with all of you.
Aman?
Hey everyone. My name is Aman. I take care of total rewards at Mobile Premier League, a gaming company. Been in this field for approximately 5 years. Have a healthy experience within consulting and total rewards within corporate. Really looking forward to have a meaningful discussion.
Anuj?
Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Anuj Vadehra. I have been working with Lenskart for more than 18 months. At Lenskart, I take care of performance and rewards, working closely with the founder CEO team. That's pretty much about me. Thank you.
All right, so we have people with great experience when it comes to rewards and performance. So I believe it will be of great benefit to all our attendees, the discussion that we have now. This is a question for all three of you. So in your extensive experience, what are the primary obstacles and complexities that you must have encountered, or like, in general, talent management and total rewards professionals encounter during performance appraisals? Uh, Anuj, I'd like to start with you.
So I think as part of appraisals, what typically tend to happen, and I will just give you a brief background that I think before we start this question, I think at any point in time, whenever any problem or challenges we need to talk about for rewards, the first and foremost thing we need to discuss is which business context we're talking about, because until or unless we don't know which domain, which talent segment, which kind of business teams we're talking about. Uh, it's not like a same solution that I talk about is going to be applicable for any company, not even in the same sector, to be honest. So just to give a background, Lenskart has around 10,000 employees, out of which are 5 to 6,000 employees are in retail segment, which are in stores. We have around 300 stores across India. Then we have another segment of talent, which we call it as supply chain, which is part of your blue collar and white collar workforce supervisory in our plant. Then we have another workforce which we tend to refer as tech and product. where we have people, who are having niche skills, and the last is the corporate one. And this is I'm talking about India, and then similarly we have certain presence in UAE and Singapore, and every market has different nuances that we need to understand that. Now, with that in perspective, what we tend to, I think the significant challenge that we will face across each of these domains will be very different. For example, in terms of what we need to drive here for corporate and what our tech and product is going to be different. One is the budget quantum that we look at. Second, it's going to be how do you compare with the market? Because, for example, the market is very diverse. I mean, if I were to talk about, let's say, what are my select peers in India or not, every company, if you see it, is extremely unique. The kind of roles that they have in their team is very unique. Having a right comparison of roles where we want to compare is difficult to do. Even when we talk about there is a slowdown in hiring, I personally think so that even when the hiring is slowed down, there are layoffs being happening. It is still not easy to attract talent, to be honest, right? It's very difficult. People are still asking for increments, 35% plus. So, I mean, that challenge remains. It's not like the market has slowed down. Uh, Now, particularly talking about the appraisal part, I think 2 or 3 things that come straight to my mind that are going to be very critical for helping address that challenge. One is that, which as companies similarly in our space will face a lot, is that when we are going to use market benchmarking data for any comparison, the first and foremost problem is that our base leveling is not right because our grade structures are not as ideal as they should be. So when I want to compare my assistant manager to market assistant manager or a manager, my baseline is not right. So how can I say the market data is right or not? Right. That's one of the biggest challenge we face when connecting to market. Second is we have 3 elements, and which is I think all of us will be facing. Right. Uh, we have one constraint of budget. One constraint we have that people need to be corrected to a certain level, and and third element is how people have performed. Now what will happen is there are people who will have performed a very who have had a very significant better performance, and but there is another person who has a good performance but is critical to the business and they have an offer from the market. Now what would you do? Right, your budget is limited, so navigating between these areas is something which gets very difficult for anybody to manage. That's my limited view from what are the challenges typically that we face.
Joel, would you like to add some things from your end for the challenges?
Yeah, sure. So what I think, what I probably can talk about is, Anuj spoke about the compensation challenges what he faces, right? So being in talent management, one thing which I've realized is that it again depends on the kind of role the HR is supposed to play in an organization. So many times what happens is, if HR has a seat at the CEO's table, so when I say that, if the expectation is that the HR is supposed to play a strategic role, it becomes very different. And most of the companies, what's happening right now is they've realized the kind of impact HR can make, right? And so the CEO is all ears, or I mean, there is a key role with which the HR plays, right? So which makes it easy for HRs to kind of contribute. So in which, okay, so what happens is there is an opportunity for the HR to look at things in a very strategic way, provide input rather than executing orders, right? And I think one thing we need to kind of keep in mind is we need to understand as HR professionals what is the ask from the business. I mean, every company may not be the same, right? So you have to kind of model your approach accordingly. So that is something which I've kind of learned over the years. And obviously it wasn't easy, and you also have your ups and downs, right? So that is probably something which I've realized. Because okay, the reason why I'm saying that is performance appraisal is one of the core functions for talent management professionals, and it is not easy. It is challenging, and if it is not driven correctly, it can have far-reaching implications because the expectation. So this is something which the HR does in every organization. So HR is like a bridge among various parties involved. When you say parties, it can be top management, mid management, or even junior level management, and obviously the employees. So it's very important to understand what the expectation is and then probably model your behavior or model your approach accordingly. So that's what I would like to add.
Aman, please share your perspective.
Sure, Gargi. So just to add a little more context before I come to the issues or challenges I typically face I believe both the rewards and the TM team sort of act as a COE, and the customers are essentially your internal stakeholders. So I guess the challenge arises in managing your stakeholders and making sure that they are happy with the information that we have. Fortunately, we as COEs take on a lot of information across the most complex thing, which is the people data. And that gives us the resulting challenges and the issues that we typically face. Making sure that the right data is available with the stakeholders and actual decisions are being taken based on the data. So while plethora of data and GBs of data with us, while we are navigating through the appraisal cycle or appraisal system in the organization, making sure that the needs of every stakeholder is aligned with the information that they need in order to incorporate that appraisal for their respective team members. I think that's one of the major challenges, I believe, which we as a reward TM professionals need to cater to. Secondly, I guess we need to find a sweet spot between how rigid, flexible we want to be for we cannot give the entire flexibility as well to the business to take decisions because that will eventually impact our budget. At the very same time, we want to be liberal and make sure that the respective teams are being appreciated and appraised appropriately so that there is no flight or erosion of skills the respective teams. I guess primarily these are the two major signals which I think we typically face.
Agreed. So what I hear, from all of your perspectives, it's that, there needs to be a balance between how we manage people and how we manage the data. And while the data will give us numbers, there's also the context of each organization that needs to be understood when we do these performance appraisal exercises. All right. So I think we'll move on to the next question. Joel, my question to you is about what are the initial actions required to undertake in the preparation of appraisal process? And what are some of the best practices that you have followed, in your career?
Yeah, so there's a lot of work which goes into these activities, right? And as HR professionals, so this is something which all of you would agree, right? And it's not something which is a one-time activity, and the preparation starts right from the beginning of the appraisal year, and obviously it is an ongoing activity. The first and foremost thing I would say is that we need to define a strong performance management philosophy. We need to really be clear about the end result. So just to kind of give you a bit of context to it, so in some of the companies, and most of the companies, I would say, ratings are used to, the performance ratings are used for decision making. Like it can be a salary, it can be a bonus payout, and all that, right? So in those companies, what happens is the ratings tend to be lenient, whereas compared to a company where the ratings are used for development activities. So those companies, it will be variable because it speaks about employee strength and improvement areas. So that is, like I mentioned earlier, it's important that we understand the purpose. So we understand why we are doing things in a certain way, right? So that's probably something which need to be kept in mind. And if you look at performance management also, it has a lot of steps in that. So obviously it starts off with planning, which includes your setting up goals, OKRs. So those are things which gets addressed there in that stage, planning stage. Monitoring, so that is probably the second stage wherein the progress made by employees gets tracked, obviously with timely feedback. And then you have the reviewing. Reviewing is where the real appraisal process comes into the picture, wherein you start getting into meetings and all that, right? So you have this 360-degree evaluation, 180-degree evaluation. So all those things comes under reviewing. And finally, the rewarding part, which involves your salaries, salary hikes, or your promotions. So these are few things. So like I mentioned earlier, one is define a strong performance management philosophy, and the idea is to ensure that is one side. These are one side of probably the activity, and the other side, it's important that it has to be communicated to the employees, the objectives of the appraisal, the timelines, and other aspects. It has to be clearly communicated before the appraisal activity gets kicked in. Training programs, that is something which has to be driven across the organization. I mean, it can be for students, it can be for managers or even employees, because if you're getting into it, you have to be sure in terms of their roles, I mean, as an appraiser or as an estimator. These are a few things which is typically or generally being taken care of. And one is okay. So yeah, the most important factor, something which I'm sure Anuj and Aman would agree with me. It has to be in alignment to the compensation philosophy of the organization, right? So organizations, assuming that organization has a well-defined compensation philosophy, because each organization is different and the way things are driven from a compensation perspective can be different, right? So it's important that the appraisal budget, which is allocated, has to be crystal in alignment with that. That is probably one key aspect, because otherwise it is going to lead to a lot of confusion later on, because it has to be clearly defined so that we can drive it. Obviously, it is top driven, but at a manager level or at a leader level, this can be driven.
Agreed.
So these are a few
Agreed.
pointers which you got to keep in mind.
There's one question that we have from Ankit. So I think I'll take it right away, and I believe all three of you can answer this question. So Ankit asks, OKR philosophy basically suggests to unlink performance rating with the increments. This is suggested to make sure employees set ambitious goals without having the fear of getting their increments affected. How do we approach appraisals for companies following this OKR philosophy? And I believe this is quite in line with the question that we just discussed. So please, any one of you, can you please shed some light on this?
So Gagi, I can pick it up. Okay, so the question is, if it is OKR based, how is it that connected to the?
So basically, the OKR philosophy suggests that like the performance shouldn't be linked to a rating, right?
Yeah.
So so if you're saying that you're gonna have performance ratings for appraisals and also have this OKR, so how do you unlink ratings and appraisals? Is what Ankit is asking.
Yeah, so that there are two ways of handling it. I mean, one, like how traditionally it is done. So there are goals, and based on goals, the employee is evaluated and the ratings are given, and based on ratings,
Correct.
the salary hikes are determined, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, so many companies are moving away from that. So traditional way of doing things like having a bell curve and having a traditional performance management is making way of continuous performance evaluation, where employee and manager meets up probably every quarter, or it can be even monthly also, right? So that is considered as a separate activity. So most of these companies, what they do is they don't really link it towards objectives or goals, and they have a different methodology. So see, companies do it in different ways. So I don't want to say that this is probably the right way of doing it. So they have a they have a set guideline in terms of how to go out with that. I mean, they don't really link your rating and your salary. It is kept separately depending on how much is the budget allocation, or how much budget can be used for that particular year, or maybe it can be like 6 months also. So, I mean, like I said, there is no right or wrong way here. So there are multiple ways of handling it now. I don't know whether I answered that question.
Yeah.
Or is it?
Ankit, I hope that answer that Joel gave answered your question. You may please let us know in the live chat.
Yeah.
I think we can move forward. And in the meantime, I hope Ankit is. All right. So Anuj, I have this question for you. Uh, in a typical compensation planning and budgeting process, sorry, just a moment. So, in a typical compensation planning and budgeting process that is followed in the organization, so how crucial is this step, that the planning and budgeting step? And can you give us some perspective into that?
So, like, I think everything is to be planned as any company, any corporate that is growing and is maturing enough. So, they would need to ensure that whatever plan they would have given to their board, they would have their respective matrices, which is your top line, bottom line, cost structures. All these things are inbuilt, right? And we need to work backwards towards how do we ensure that we are within the numbers we given to the board. Now, with that in perspective, we need to genuinely plan to the T that how much I'm going to spend on increments, how much I'm going to spend on bonuses, how much I'm going to spend on my R&R engagement activities, right? So to answer that, it's extremely very important. Now, any process on appraisal like this would involve four steps. First step is going to be on the, which Joel very detailed touched upon, was the philosophy bit, where anything we need to have is a very robust performance philosophy, and I can name a few levers that we use very extensively at Lenskart, which we have designed, and and by the way, we have communicated the philosophy transparently to all employees as well. So one of the very key elements of our performance philosophy, which is linked to rewards as well, is transparency. Second is fairness, and third would be high differentiation on performance, right?
Correct.
Currently, we are growing at a CAGR of 60%, even though we have a top line of 2100 crores. But even with that, we are continuing to growing at 60% growth. Now, with that in place, we it gets difficult to, I mean, manage pace versus the process bit, because sometimes agility comes at the cost of customization and process being off the shelf, right? So we need to genuinely think that what is going to be philosophy, and whatever processes that we design are linked to that philosophy. That's the first part that defines
Correct.
whatever process you design is going to be linked to that. Next part is on the budgeting, which is dependent on, for us, will be dependent on four to five criteria. One is what is the inflation in that country, largely looking at. Next, what is the cost of living that has changed in that country in the recent past. For example, in Singapore, we have seen that the rents have gone significantly up in the last few 8 months, 6 to 8 months, right? Which has cost, which has definitely going to be impacting the kind of increment budgets the company will take into perspective, because people will, and we also have to understand that as we move towards east side, people are more keen to be more stable to a job. They don't prefer changing a job a lot, right? If you go move towards Singapore or maybe towards Japan. However, in case whenever there are instances like cost of living being very high, people then would have to do, because they need to sustain their lifestyle accordingly, right? Now with inflation typically at a 2 to 3% there ideally, but if the rent are increasing by 10-15%, they have to have a higher increment to be budgeted as part of the appraisal. That's what is something that is happening. The third part we want to look at is what is the our positioning versus market salary, right? Ideally, are we maybe, let's say in UAE, let's say when we started out, we started with very base salary, lower salary. Now we are sizable enough, so maybe we want to ensure that we pay at line with market. We don't want to be underpaid. We don't want to lose those talent, right? The ones who have built that business from scratch. Our positioning versus market. Last is what is the trend that these reports like Aon, Deloitte, Mercer, KF share, that what the market industry increment percentage. Are we in line with that? If our performance has been better than the market, maybe we can give up more delta to higher increment to those employees, because the kind of talent that we hire as compared to market, maybe because we are planning to raise the bar every year. We are hiring the cream of the market. That's why we tend to genuinely pay higher, and that's okay with it, because the incremental cost impact of that to my business is much higher. So I'm okay with that higher cost impact as well. Rather than like the Pareto principle, my 20% of the top performers drive 80% of the business, right? Where that's why I will rather focus on hiring the top people who deliver 10x rather than having a mediocre talent, which is okay with a mediocre increment of 7-8%. So that's the philosophy that we work with. That's why I touched upon it. It's linked to philosophy, high differentiation of performance, right? That's what we tend to drive. A third step to this will be for us distribution. Now, again, like Joel mentioned, everything links to philosophy. Distribution, how do you do it? Is it done centrally by the HR team, basis rating closure, or is it a budget is given to the department heads, or is it budget is given to the managers? So how is it, right? Every company would have their different philosophies. What works best in different companies will be different, and might also be different. Departments can be different, right? So, for example, maybe for tech and product, I will give them the leeway. Maybe for retail segment, I will do it centralized, because the past population is 5,000. I can't give a lot of independence there, right? So that depends. That variation needs to be taken into consideration. Now, second part, which is very unique, might be unique to Lenskart, is that how do you structure compensation, right? For example, let's say when we are giving increments to the tune of, let's say, some corrections to the tune of 25% or 30%, and we genuinely want to retain that talent, should we build everything into fixed, that they get that fixed, maybe get a higher increment, and then maybe go and find another job, or we structure it in a manner where there is some lever of retention, so that maybe we pay out some element at the end of the year. They have a lever to stay back and not pay everything part fixed. So how do you structure the compensation after the increment has been done is something that we do very extensively. Maybe how do we play around with components of pay, having something unique which tends to drive retention, which is our intention, that part. Uh, then how much to differentiate from mediocre to top performers? Is it 1.5x? Is it 2x? Budget is X. And people, depending on compa ratio, let's say people who are low paid and high paid, for my high paid employees who are meeting expectations, should I give an increment or not because they are already high paid? So these are the decisions that we need to take as a company, and uh, which something people in the industry would want to look at. Last bit is, I think, on the distribution section is how do we look at compensation for CXOs? It's very very different, right, for senior management, where a large part of compensation is driven through stocks. Now, uh, how much stocks to give or not to give? Do they value stocks? How do you value stocks, right? Essentially, I mean, every company will have a different plan. Some might have RSUs, some might have ESOPs, uh, and depending on what proposition they is into picture, is it liquid, is it not illiquid? So these are the few parameters that are very important for any company to understand that how much stocks are going to be there, how are they being valued, are they being valued or not. Accordingly, the decision for CXO compensation is taken. Maybe for the base increment, we are okay with 5-6% for them because they're already at a higher fixed base. But on stocks is where we tend to differentiate a lot depending on what the impact they created on the business. Last bit is again, which is very undervalued, but the most important, I think, is the part of communication, where everything designed well fails through until it is not communicated effectively, right? Like Joel mentioned that and we should have a plan in structure. And the plan is communicated to the employees. We should know what the timelines, what the process steps, and HRBPs are trained enough. They know they are involved at every step. They are also aware they can handle the FAQs very well. We have our accountability and RASI metrics defined, where who is responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. All that part is there. There might be deviations from the plan, but we should be ready with that. That's very very important for any plan to actually sail through. That's my limited inputs.
So way I understand it is like, you need to have certain information uh, readily with you when you go in for the appraisal plans, and of course your philosophy that belongs to the organization. So when it comes to like, what kind of differentiator would you like to have for the top performer versus an average performer, or when it comes to understanding the compa ratios, right? So all this information, do you think for like, startups, it is easily available out there in the market?
To be honest, again, like not, I'm not sure if all startups are even aligned to market. I mean, are they even wanting to align to market? Sometimes, depending on the founder, so currently we don't have a CHRO. Piyush is the CHRO I work with. I report to Piyush only. So Piyush's thought is that we don't want any market data to drive. Because, so I'll tell you what his thought process is. Market is very diverse, right? And it is very difficult to pick and choose which exactly market is right or not, because no company will give you transparent data. Anyways, I will never get to know that maybe what HUL is paying for a finance manager at VP level. I will not know that, right? I will know that only through recruitment. So market data is anyways 80 to 120% match. It is good for me to create pay ranges and maybe for mid to junior levels, but for senior levels, market data is, I don't think so. Would make a lot of sense, because for senior levels, it is pay for person, right? It is not pay for role. So for as we are growing enough, now is where we are genuinely thinking enough to have a market data as a very relevant input. But prior to this, when we were just expanding left, right, center, we just hired people based on, we liked the people, we paid whatever they were getting, and that's the approach that we had used in the past. But how is that sustainable? Maybe not. But then now onwards is where we are looking at market data is going to be a very critical input for all inputs, our decisions going forward based on pay range. Is it easily available? I think there are companies in the market that are coming up. And maybe traditional companies like Aon Mercer, they tend to provide the static data. But like Highshore is looking forward to provide a dynamic data which can be live tracked and checked. I think it's a step in the right direction, to be honest.
All right. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anuj. Now, I'd like to have some more idea about, the compensation data that is coming in. How accurate and reliable do you think, how much do you, as rewards professionals, trust on the market data that comes in? And Aman, I would like to hear your perspective on that.
Sure, Gargi. I guess we are a typical HR organization or comp professional. We rely on consultants like WTW, Aon, Mercer for our market benchmarking exercises. However, I guess one of the limitation that which we have faced, or rather two limitations that we have faced at MPL is one, as Anuj was mentioning, that there are certain roles where we pay for the person, not paying for the role. The benchmarks and data works very well for roles which are very, I would say, more than 50% of the role involve BAU activities, wherein we are essentially paying for the role, and we do not want the replenishment cost for the role would be very limited, or we can rehire a person very limited time. So for those areas and for those roles, it definitely we that's a bang on for us with respect to compensation data. However, working in the gaming industry, there are a lot of roles which are very niche to us. There are software engineers as well as product artists who are very niche and very special, have very specialized skills which cannot be found. Which roles are not essentially industry agnostic, like role like mine, which is very industry agnostic. Uh, so in such cases, we there's very limited data available for us. At the very same time, the data that is available cannot be used for decision making or hiring the right candidate. Similar to hiring maybe a CXO for a typical organization. So that's one area. And secondly, I think there's a lot of time gap with respect to data accuracy we get. Maybe 5 years back in the time, things were not very cyclical or things didn't advance very well over a 12-month period. However, if you look at the current scenario, a lot of things changes in a 12-month scenario, which is like a typical time frame where we get the results from consultants like WTW and Mercer, because they have a very extensive cycle where they collect data and report over a period of time. On the other hand, I think what Hiresure is trying to do for a very focusing on the startups, which are where a lot of things changes and there's a lot of seasonalities that impacts their business as well as business models within a limited time period. I guess that's a very step in the right direction, and which would kind of solve the seasonality issue which we typically face with respect to accurate com data from the consultants that we work with.
That's Thank you so much, Aman. So we have a question in line with what we have been discussing right now. So what are some key considerations when selecting the compensation benchmarking sources for objective valuation? So please, one of you can please answer that.
I think, if I pick that question up, I think while we are looking at benchmarks, I think what we need to understand is how, as of now, we have the internal pay equity within the organizations before we compare ourselves with the market first. So that even though if we are in line with the market, there's not a lot of disparity within the organizations, which we need to correct for. Once we have those internal benchmarks and we have realized that either we are not in sync with the respective grades, we need to take corrective action either by having a more robust grading system or have a meaningful performance cycle to make sure that the delta between the disparity between the within the organization is very limited. The second
Mm-hmm.
the second source of compensation data is, of course, working with consultants and organizations like Hiresure to have accurate data for the organization that we typically resonate with. So while we are doing that at MPL, we typically look to benchmark ourselves with organizations where one, who are in a very similar industry or at a very similar growth life cycle like MPL is in. Second, the most important part is talent mobility. So we have a robust data of our talent acquisition as well as the employee life cycle, wherein we try to understand we from where the organization we are hiring is essentially from, and essentially the organization we are losing talent to. Those essentially becomes our major two parameter with respect to talent mobility, where we want to see we do not want to lose our talent to these organizations. At the very same time, while
Hmm.
trying to hire candidates from XYZ organizations, we are in line with what they are essentially doing. So I think combining and marrying these two thoughts and maintaining that internal and external parity while having your North Star of what you want to pursue out of the competitor, I think that will solve the essential problem of the sources.
Hmm. All right. Thank you so much, Aman. That answers question for you, Shivani. So let me take.
Gagi, I believe you're on mute.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I believe the question answers the question, Shivani. Let's move forward. We were talking about a lot of market benchmarking data that comes in through a lot of consultants or through some internal intelligence that you may acquire from the talent acquisition or through the way by which exits from the company, right? What are the potential pitfalls or limitations organizations should be aware of when using the compensation data, be it the market data or be it the internal intelligence data? What kind of pitfalls should a reverse professional be aware of? Uh, Aman, can you please take that?
Sure, Raghi. I think uh, uh, I think the most important or the very important thing is understanding how we are using the compensation data and what is our essential objective is. Because I guess comp data, whether internal or external, in silo, it essentially are basically insights. Now, how do you action upon it is essentially your ultimate goal of utilizing that. And what we typically do at MPL is we try to link the compensation data with the entire journey of the employee and take targeted decisions for the respective teams or the respective employee at a very granular level. So for instance, if hypothetically, if I just look at a compensation data in a silo that X person is at a zero point 0.7 compa, we need to correct him to market by giving a, let's say, 30-40% increment. But is that role that relevant for the organizations? Or at the very same time, is that a role very critical that that would warrant a 30 to 40% increment for the employee? We try to map the journey of the entire the for the respective employee as well as how the entire vertical pans out for the MPL as a business unit, which helps us take more targeted decisions for in such scenarios. At the very same time, I think one pitfall we typically face, which I sort of enunciated earlier as well, there's a sort of seasonality when it comes to compensation data that we typically use. And essentially, for instance, there has been a lot of layoffs recently in the few months. However, those cannot be factored in the comp data that we have been using from the last year. And we need to have certain assumptions as well as some internal know-how to make those adjustments in our pay ranges if we are looking at a very if you're looking the hiring as a very empirical decision rather than a people decision. So I think that seasonality is one of the pitfalls that we ideally face as comp professionals, which I think HireSure is on the right direction to provide us real-time information for us, which I think over time when we have much more data and there are much more data refreshes over time, time series analysis along with a more robust data refresh would definitely serve that purpose. I think primarily, I believe these are the two major pitfalls uh, I typically face with respect to using com data.
Um, Very because Aman brought up that in the conversation right now, right? So we saw a season of when compensations got incremented by a considerable amount, and now when we see that market is a little towards the downturn, right? And in that particular perspective, as rewards professionals, how do you think about your pay philosophies? Do you think about changing your pay philosophy when such market ups and downs are frequent, or do you think that as an organization you would stick to something that has worked for you over time, and even when the market is in the downturn, you would like to stick to that so that employees are more aligned to the organization. One of you may please take it.
Sorry, I can you just repeat the last few? I'm sorry.
What I was asking was that, what Raman just mentioned about market being far too volatile over the last few years,
Hmm.
wherein a certain period we saw that markets were the salaries were increasing at a quite a fast pace. And now we've come to a situation where markets are a little slower than what it was like maybe 2 years or 3 years ago, right? And in that aspect, how do you as rewards professional react to these volatile changes, and how does the rewards philosophy get affected by these frequent changes?
So, to be honest, I think should we say that is there no impact of the market downs and turns to any company? I don't think so. There is a lot of impact. How every company deals with it is very different. Now, for example, that when the markets were like very high in 21 and 22, right, where people were just expecting increments 40, 50, 70, 80, 100, 200%, right, and people have got that kind of increments. Now, what happened in that kind of stage is that companies knew that they wanted candidates and they were struggling to find any. And because they were to just fill a position, they gave significant amount of money, and the kind of quality that everybody was able to hire was not always top the notch. They had to generally lower the bar for the kind of people that they had to find in the market. Now, what has happened is that we have certain level of people that are there in the company right now. They that were there in the company. We hired certain people at a very higher cost, but they were not at par at quality with what our existing people were at, who still stayed with the company. And these are two levels, and third is where we aspire to be, right? And this creates a lot of disparity because of this. What happened in the downturn? Now, like no, I will not say downturn, but maybe a great resignation phase where now I would term that was again every phase that was a phase where right it ended. Now we are in a phase where companies are you being very conscious about how they are hiring, how they are hiring. If they were, if any company would have done any rampant hiring, eventually they are now answerable to the board because every VC in startup world or any investor in the listed companies is asking question on profitability and EBITDA. That's the keyword, right? Top line is the era of top line is over. It's now talking about profitability. We fortunately are a very profitable company. We have a 70% gross margin, so not a concern for us at the moment. But still, I think that's a question industry wide is happening, where the focus is on profitability, focus is on value for money. Now, in a downturn where a lot of MNCs are laying off people, where talent is still available, I will term it is not very easily available. My point of view is that because I mean you will not hire just anyone right now because you will be choosy in terms of what kind of people you would bring on board. With that in perspective is I think what we are doing is we are being conscious of what money we pay, and for the good candidates, right, we are still okay to pay higher because our agenda is not budget limitation and controlling our salaries or costs, but the agenda is to genuinely have the best in class population work with Lenskart. So with that in mind is where what we're targeting this market as, where even in a downturn, we are picking up, it's publicly available where people are laying off, list is available. We are targeting those kind of segment of employees. We are able to get some on board. But I still feel that for top of the market people, jobs are still available. It's never a downturn. It's for them, people. If you're top class, you will still get a job because companies are still hiring. I'm not saying they are not hiring at all. They're still hiring and they will continue to hire. Even this phase will get over. Now,
Mm-hmm.
second part, this is on the hiring front. Second is on the existing employees. Now, let's say now we are not downturn and let's say not easily jobs are not available. Now, should I decrease my budget to ensure that I save money? Will that be right or not? That's a question that typically investors and boards will ask. There is a question that will come up. There's a downturn. Why are you paying so much increment? Last year you gave X percentage. Why not give lesser increment? Right. The question is that, like the Great Resignation, this is also just a phase. This will also eventually get over, right? Where market will still open up, people will again go. Now, if I penalize or maybe use the advantage of saving few crores here and there, just by giving lesser increments to deserving people, they will still leave then, because the markets when they open, they will be the first ones to leave, and the good ones will be the first ones to leave. So, with that in perspective, we should again link to philosophy. We should be fair, and that's the main objective. We should be fair in our approach that we should do. That's my limited point of view.
Thank you so much, Anuj. As such, the conversation is about pay parities, internal and external as well. Uh, I would like to ask Joel about this. Joel, how do you deploy strategies to address any pay parity issues? And I believe a lot of times at the planning stage itself, one would notice that there are parity issues when it comes to the internal within the organization or be it external. So, how do you plan your appraisal to address these parity issues?
Yeah, Gargi. So I think this is a topic which will never go out of discussion, because this is something which will be there, and we cannot really have a permanent or have a perfect scenario where everybody is paid the same. Okay, in the sense everybody is paid the same salary, or everybody is getting what they deserve, right? So what happens is when companies go out and hire, obviously you will have to give them salary hikes, and once they come on board, I mean they will be definitely above probably the existing guys. So the question over here is, how would the company want to go about it? I mean, is the company ready to go ahead and probably give others, right? I mean, based on performance, or like whatever criteria they're using. Are they looking at getting these guys at the same level, or how much, like Aman was talking about delta, right? So how much difference can you afford? Like what should be that range? These are things which, as an organization, you need to take a decision. Again, that again goes back to the competition philosophy and the talent management philosophy what companies have. So a couple of things what you can do is, one is, you can try to kind of reduce the disparity if say for example, if somebody is at the same level, like two people working at the same level, if there is a lot of difference, maybe like a 30 or 40% difference. So what you can do is, you can probably look at getting this person up maybe in the next appraisal cycle, or you can do some off cycle whatever appraisals, or salary hikes, right? So these are things which is like very subjective, and this is like purely dependent on the organizations, like how they would like to go ahead with. I think as a so if you ask me, like personally, what I believe is, you gotta ensure that there is no okay, you cannot really completely eliminate the disparity whatever is there, but you should kind of try to reduce that gap, so that somebody who's performing well has to be definitely what do you call definitely compensated for that, and the person should not lose out, right? And obviously you need to look at exceptions, you need to look at some approvals if there is a requirement. So that is probably my take on this, so that there is parity maintained, and people are kind of satisfied with whatever they are getting. So that's my take on this.
Mhm. All right, thank you so much, Joel. And Joel, this is about parities within the organization. But can you please, speak a little on how do you, work around parities that are external?
Yeah, so I think one way of handling that is like how Aman and Anuj mentioned, right? So we do depend upon external vendors. I mean, obviously, you guys are also now started giving us data, right? The real time data, like how much is the market paying, right? I mean, say for example, if somebody is in a certain designation, how much that person, he or she, like how much they are getting for doing their job. So you got to look at the data. You got to look at your comparators. I mean, the comparator basket. You got to ensure you got to understand where you are as an organization in comparison with your peers or competitors, and then you got to take an informed decision. So that's how you can be in alignment with the market. I mean, if you ask me, is that 100% accurate? May not be. So at least you'll get a reference in terms of how to go about things. I mean, how the ranges work in the current market, and obviously through data refresh, you'll get to know what's happening, right? So that is one way of going about it.
Thank you so much, Joel. I'd like to ask, in specific cases, right? You understand, some of your employees are considerably above market, or some of your employees are considerably below the market. How would you address these, probably, corner cases, something like that, when it comes to the appraisal planning?
Like I mentioned earlier, you gotta look at the range. You gotta ensure that the disparity is reduced, right? And if
Correct.
somebody is getting way above his market range or whatever the percentile or the compare ratio, definitely he or she should not be probably given that the salary hike, right? And so there is a certain average salary which is given as part of your
Correct.
appraisal cycle, right? So you gotta kind of ensure that you gotta actually be a little flexible. You cannot really have the same approach for everybody, right? So I think it's important that that has to be kind of taken care of. And when I say that it has to be taken care of, sometimes what happens is somebody who might be really performing well, like who's top rated,
Mhm.
and just because he's already getting paid above the market range, we may not be able to give that salary hike, which is fine. But it's important that it has to be communicated to him. But again, it again depends on the organization. Some of the organizations, they publish their salary information. I'm not saying everybody. I mean, if you look at companies in US and all, it's mandatory that they have to publish the salary information when they open up a requirement, right? Again, it goes back to the approach of the organization. But it's very important that the communication happens over there, effective communication happens, because as if I'm that high performer, I deserve to know like why I may not be
Mhm.
getting the salary hike what I'm expecting. And you keep telling people that you should not be going and talking about salary hikes, your salaries and all that, but you know how these things are. I mean,
Not
we
at all.
do talk about it, and so it's important that as a manager or as a leader, you communicate and you kind of give them the clarity so that these things are addressed right away.
There's a question by an anonymous user. They're asking, how can organizations effectively communicate and justify these pay decisions to employees, particularly in cases where pay disparities may exist? So, how do you go about communicating this to the employees?
See, two things here. Again, so I think I keep talking about this, right? I mean, organizations are different. It's about how, as an organization, what is your approach, or what is it okay for you to reveal to your employees, right? So keeping that in mind, it's important for the managers and leaders to ensure that the communication is done, and HR can play a key role here. So that's what I was talking about when I mentioned about training, right? So that is training is one opportunity, the appraisal training, which happens before the appraisal season gets kicked off. So that is an opportunity for managers and leaders to kind of ask these questions, or the HR BPs or the HR professionals can guide the managers in terms of how to go about it. What are certain things which they have to keep in mind? What are the do's and don'ts? What all things can be communicated? So these are things which you can drive it across the organization.
Mm-hmm.
That is what my answer would be for this.
All right. Uh, uh, Thank you so much, Joel. Anush, my next question to you is, what are some key considerations that any organization should keep in mind while designing the evaluation frameworks? And are there any, parameters that you, or metrics that should be included for any compensation evaluation?
So I think was briefly also covered in the part where I was talking about distribution. That what are the parameters that you cover typically consider. So one of them I think will be the most important one would be that how do you differentiate performance, right? And when I say differentiate performance, we typically tend to think in terms of top performer and the mediocre performer. But then it's also very much important that what to do with the maybe bottom two raters or more than 20% of the population. Should we give no increments, or should we give some inflation increments? And the answer to that is not determined by what market is doing, which sometimes people tend to think. The answer to that is determined that what do you want to do with those people, right? Do you want to keep them, not keep them? Do you want to give them a messaging? What kind of messaging you want to give them that either they have to up the game and then only they will get increments? So that messaging is very important. Socialistic companies or maybe majority of the companies in the industry will be like, let's give them some increments. Some department heads might come to you that we have done force fitting. You asked us to do it. That's why we are doing that. So again, it's linked to that. As a company, what we do is we don't do any force fittings. We don't do any backups. We ask people to rate objectively on the rating scale, and before we ask people to do the ratings, we tell them that these people will not get any increments, right? That's there.
Okay.
They know it. So it's not like a surprise. You ask me to force fit people into these ratings, and now you are asking me to do that. What we tell them is, this is the organizational curve. Essentially, we will have organizational will try to be closer to this, right? You do freely. If your department has done well, you please feel to have a free flow. There can be good deviation. We will not ask you to force fit people. If it's, let's say if we ask bottom 20%, if it's 25, 26, 27, we will not hold your neck. But let's say if I ask you to have 20% in the bottom performers and you have put 5% and your department performance has not been good, it is not justified. If you've done very well, your department has delivered to the T, I will not even ask questions if you don't put anybody in the bottom rating. So that's the kind of flexibility we work with. And that's when we link it with increments that your department didn't perform, and still you are giving your bottom 20% any increments. You're wasting your budget, and what is going to happen is that budget is going to go to your bottom performers, and who will leave? Your top performers, because they didn't get enough money to stick with the company. So that's the thought process we work with, and with that perspective is where we ensure that how to distribute budget is very important. Second, again, on the point of people who are high performers, right? And who are high performers and they're actually already a very, very high paid. Now, how do you tackle those situations, right? Do you continue to pay them much higher, or you don't give them any increments, or you do give them some increments and work around with a holistic package for them? So traditionally, we used to continue to give them very high increments. Now is when we have started questioning things, and I'm not saying we have asked them to not give any increments. Questioning things when department head will recommend a increment for someone who is already at a comp ratio of 1.3 or above, right? They will have to give clear justification. And if they are giving some increment like 7, 8, 10% depending on the budget, it's okay. But if they're giving still higher increment, we will give them suggestions that rather than giving increments, give them ESOPs, give them something else, but rather focus on other elements, because it should not be a case you create a very cost heavy structure. Eventually the person leaves and then you are asking that I want to hire a replacement for that at that cost only. So being very conscious of a holistic overview rather than just taking a decision which basis a grade or a matrix.
Anuj, but that was a great example of having personal accountability as well as group accountability, wherein departments are also responsible for certain of their beyond personal going towards group accountability, and that's definitely a great way that you are evaluating.
A
Thank you so
very
much
important
for.
thing in here, what I would also like to highlight is that it also depends what kind of maturity your department heads have, right? I'm sure every company will have a department heads where they are not matured enough to take those decisions. They will just always clip, no matter what you give them, any budget, any rating scale, they will always be clipping, and that's fine. I mean, eventually they will also get matured. The good part is that as a company, and it takes years to build that, a culture where all department heads know that their neck is on the line for their team. If and when I say that, it comes with a lot of meanings behind that, which means that if the rating that you are proposing and you are asking people to, let's say, and there have been cases, some departments didn't perform, or they okay perform, but they still didn't have anyone in the bottom performers. Now the accountability for them is that next year, right? If you still don't deliver, if you think your team is very good, right? And next year they don't perform, then your neck on the line, your job is on the line, because you thought, basis your judgment, that the team is very good and they still deliver. That means you are as a leader not the right fit. Same goes for increments, right? If you are distributing a lot of increments to your team, and which is unfair, which is causing disparity and all, then you are the one who will going to be accountable on that, right? It's a question on you. So it's not like, my CEO is giving me money and I'm distributing. That's not the job of the leader. The job of the leader is I judiciously use that money and drive effective performance for the company. And if I am not able to do that, then my neck is on the line. That's the key thing I think in this place.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Anuj. That was right. Okay. So I'd like to understand one more thing from all of you, actually, and this is in today's world where we have like so many startups and we have so many organizations which do depend on a lot of technology. How much does technology play a part in your individual organizations when it comes to be it compensation benchmarking, or be it the appraisal exercises, or be it the compensation planning for appraisals? So, how does technology affect all of these aspects?
I think so. As a company, we are extremely tech focused. But unfortunately, HR as a domain for us has been one of the last least in the way we have or will be, not will be actually, have progressed in the past. That's going to change very much soon, and we are going to do a lot of investment. We've done a lot of investment in HRMS systems. We've hiring people there to build HR technology and analytics from scratch. Uh, Now, in terms of how this is, I mean, HR tech, I think is a very broad sphere, and competition is maybe just a small element to that, right?
Mhm.
Analytics and tech integration is, I think, something where a lot of things can be done through that, which is, linkage of your people do NPS score, ENPS score. People do, you do multiple surveys through Amber and all different companies. You have data of performance, you have data of compensation, you have data on what kind of, I mean, are they setting the goals on time or not? In terms of if you follow OKR, how frequently are they checking in with their managers? There's so much plethora of data available, right? Where you can genuinely design an early warning signal, which we are actually designing for our frontline sales. We are designing an early warning signal and kind of an approach through in collaboration with our analytics team. So I think that has a lot of potential, and early iteration is maybe just a scratch on the surface, right? I think there are a lot of other things that come along with that. Is a lot of benefits that companies tend to offer. Maybe it's early wage access, maybe it's kind of R&R. Everything has to be tech interlinked, right? Maybe gift vouchers that we provide for employees. For Lenskart, gift vouchers, because I mean we are a retail company where we can genuinely give vouchers for people to buy spectacles or gift spectacles and all. So all these things has to be very tech integrated, where people are, it's easy to use. Maybe for like insurance, right? Even for an insurance player, this year we intentionally chose a player which was very tech focused, so that we don't want to call up someone in the HR team to check what is my insurance ID number, right? We want that people have an app, they go to the app, everything is there. They know their employee, they know their health card ID number, they get the facility, and it's done. They have discounts and all for buying medicines and etc. on their app. They want to do a health test at their home, integrated with their app. They can do it. So I think it's about experience rather than just ticking the box of giving them insurance. So HR tech plethora is very wide rather than particularly focusing on compensation. Compensation is, I think, one good element which is actually for utility of the maybe HR team, to be honest, not employees, because the data won't be available to employees. But eventually, I do foresee that and not maybe within the next 6 months, but maybe 2 years or so, where we can have a dashboard of market compensation data accessible to the central HR team as well as HRBPs as well as TAs, right? And they are equipped enough to understand how to use that. One is having data, and second is a very different thing of using data, right? I can give you a range of a HR manager of 15 lakh to 25 lakh rupees, and you will not know where to hire what, right? What kind of pedigree you are hiring for. So it's like using data is also something which needs to be built as a capability in the HR team, and that's when this HR tech
Definitely.
integration from compensation will make a lot of sense for the whole HR COE.
Mhm. Uh, Joel, can you please shed light on the use of HR tech, or especially for compensation that you foresee within your organization, or in future for HR community as a whole?
I think it's pretty similar to what Anuj mentioned. We are a C-series funded startup, and if you look at the kind of processes or the kind of structure or the tools what we have, like in the last 1 year, we did a lot of progress, and this year it's kind of slowed down a bit because of the market conditions. We are trying to focus a little bit more on efficiency, right? I think Anuj, we should probably catch up after this. Looks like you have the same service provider for insurance, so that we will talk. So we also have so these are things which we consciously did in terms of the experience what employees should have, right? In terms because insurance can be a real hassle, and we have a beautiful vendor who kind of gives us what we want. It's an app-based service provider, wherein everything's like available in the click of a button, right? So that is probably one area we have invested on, and it is really working well. And we also have our HRMS system, and we also have tie-ups with a couple of compensation benchmarking vendors also. And you guys are also there now, which definitely is going to add more value because it's going to be real time. And most of these vendors, they don't have real time data. So if you ask me, there is still a lot to do in terms of automating stuff and all that, but we are going a little slow right now. But HR being a key component, I mean, it's very important that we do it so that the efficiency can be increased, right? And we talk about ChatGPT, we talk about AI and all that, and it's important that we also need to catch up a little more. We are a SaaS company, so definitely this is something which is one of our top priorities, probably in the next couple of years.
Aman?
I think unlike any business decisions, I guess people and HR decisions are very, I would say, complex and cannot be completely taken only on the basis of technology or empirical evidences. So how we try at MPL is we try not to explicitly take decisions based on technology, but rather eliminate and sort of reduce the odds of taking a wrong decisions basis on the data that we have historically at the organization. Before I sort of delve deeper into how com data essentially helps us, I guess where typically organization sort of faces a bottleneck is especially when an organization is growing very drastically. So, for instance, MPL grew from a headcount of 200 to 1200 in a matter of 8 months. So, in that scenario or a hyper growth phase, you sort of lose in touch with your basics. So in terms of technology, your basics are essentially managing your candidate lifecycle and your employee lifecycle, which we typically do via tech tools known as ATS and NHRMS. So these two technology are like the two solid pillars in order to have a robust ecosystem for any future deep dive or a predictive analytics that you may want to do with respect to your employee data or com data. So I guess first of all, having these basics to technology in a very robust and a correct manner is like a must have or a bread and butter with respect to any sort of analytics within the people function. Now, once that is in place and there's a cadence within your talent acquisition teams as well as your HR partner teams to have that refreshed in a very real-time basis, things like predictive modeling as well as comp analytics can act as a facilitator for decision making across the life cycle of for the candidates or for the employees. So, for instance, if I give you an example, what we're trying to right now build within the talent acquisition team is to have a model wherein com data could be merged with the typical recruitment funnel, wherein not only we have, let's say, a percentage of funnel across the selection process, but at the very same time have that recruitment or odds against the salary range as well. So, for instance, let's say we are hiring a software engineer, what would be the essential funnel look like if the budget is 18 lakhs versus what would be the funnel like if my budget is 25 lakhs? So, accordingly, the recruiter could allocate his or her bandwidth and sourcing the candidates. So, I guess this linking compensation data with the HR portfolio of ATS and HRMS is the only way forward to essentially use it. Otherwise, it's merely evidence which may not be used by the organization and just be end up being a good to have feature.
One more question I'd like to ask all three of you is regarding when appraisals do happen, of course, it is not just the HR QEs which are participating, but it is also the people managers across the organizations that are part of this. And Joel, you did mention, and Anuj also mentioned that a lot of training that needs to happen for all of these people managers, and there is a certain level of resistance that is generally seen to adopting technologies, to adopting maybe the softwares that HRQE may go ahead and select that okay, this is a public, moving away from the traditional Excel sheets towards more platform driven kind of an approach. So how do you kind of tackle that resistance that comes in from organization in general towards adopting technologies when it comes to maybe such activities?
I think in my view, any HRMS system that typical company use and maybe others can validate as well. Compensation continues to be the last piece that goes to tech. And there are multiple reasons for that. One is confidentiality. You don't want everybody to know backend what comp data is there available. One. Second is every company has such unique comp structures to an extent that it gets very difficult to have the customization available in a robust tool, because one, only matured companies typically tend to have a very good HRMS system, and these HRMS systems typically are designed by some global companies where there is some customization available, but not sure to the extent of compensation structure that companies have. The last bit, not the last bit actually, but then the third bit is that with unique compensation structures, confidentiality, and the last bit is that uh, how do you manage compliances as well as linkage to monthly payroll from a CTC structure is very different, right? Typical companies have a third party vendor for a payroll management, which not all the time is linked to a CTC structure. So that linkage is not very robust all the time. Compliances keep changing, and when you have a sizable organization like 10,000 employees, it's get very difficult to have a way of having a structure in that way which is efficiently managed, unless you dedicatedly spend time, maybe a 6 month period or a 3 month period at least, to ensure all accurate data, which is ideal way with structures, is uploaded on the portal. And especially at a company at the way we are working, a 3 months leeway gap is something which is, I don't think so anybody will get in Lenskart, because with the way agile the company is, every year we are evolving very very fast and that's linked to business only, I think. So it gets difficult. But however, not a lot of tools also are available in the market, right? Traditional HRMS systems don't cater to your need right now. Maybe select players are there which can help you with comp appraisal, but they will not, mostly they will never be available with your traditional HRMS systems. So you have to build something over and above. Now again, that's
Mm,
right. Is company okay to bear that cost for something they might not even be sure of that tech they want to use or not, because they're comfortable using competition on Excel, right? Because it's one, it's
mm,
confidential, leaked. Third, it's easily managed. They are resistant to the change. Unlike all other HRM, HR processes which are impacting all employee experience. Competition on HRMS does not impact employee experience as such. It's just for managing appraisal for a select team, which they prefer to be managed through Excel, not. Uh, so yeah, it's a large game. Unless a company has a large rewards team or spread across location, then they would tend to move towards a HRMS or having separate investment to HRMS tool for compensation. But I'm not sure if companies are. Maybe Joel and Aman can have a add on to this view.
I think I'll. Aman, would you like to go next?
Sure.
Yeah.
Essentially, I think where again a portal or a tool which helps in managing your appraisal cycles really helps, wherein you are managing I would say a larger team where the interests are very similar. So, for instance, if I take an example of MPL versus let's say a typical PPO organization, who's or let's say a call center. If you're managing the appraisals for these two organizations, it will definitely work for the call center because they're very similar roles in a large volume. On the other hand, the complexity is very low with respect to your people expectations as well as the diversity with which the individual employees at. On the other hand, while if you look at MPL, we are just, let's say we are at a 700 headcount, but every individual is a very, every pay decision for every 700 is very complex. So in such scenarios, there are like multitude of exceptions, and whenever there are exceptions, any system fails. We evaluated a couple of portals as well as Comport as well as Pay Review. However, one the complexity that exists in an organization kind of deters that decision. And secondly, the ultimate goal of that tool is to facilitate our stakeholders, and there has to be buy-in for the stakeholder, be it the vertical lead or the people manager. Uh, if we have that buy-in and the usability of that tool by the respective stakeholder, this is going to prosper and function. Otherwise, it's just going to good to have features. So when we ran that pilot, so what essentially happened was while there was a tool and a dashboard which was on cloud, what hiring managers and people managers typically ended up doing was downloading an extract and using on Google Sheet itself because that is what their requirement was, and re-uploading the final sheet. So it was like uh, finding a loophole within the tool that we are launching and paying for, as a result of which, I guess this complexity and the buy-in act as a deterrent while we are looking at com tools.
Joel?
Yeah, so I think pretty similar to what Aman and Anuj said. I mean, I've worked with large corporations, and so what I understand is they still do these exercises in Excel sheet because it's such a complex activity, especially for bigger organizations wherein this huge headcount is involved, right? And very few options are available in the market. And but again, even if you get them, it's not very easy to customize based on the company's requirement. I don't know. I mean, now that ChatGPT is here, we'll have to find whether any plugins are available so that we can get this done. Or maybe it's a startup idea also. That is something which you guys can explore since you guys work in this field, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like to answer that question, Joel, actually, we are already on our way to come up with something that will help all of these and cater to these customizations, or be it like, the data, like, secrecy, or like, whatever it may be, like, all of these aspects, and help with all the customizations that, like, will be required at the COE level, or be it at the management level, department head level, that what kind of customizations are required, and that is something we plan to come up with quite soon.
Yeah,
So
I think all
I
the
hope that will.
yeah, yeah. I think all of us would be really happy if we can pull it off because it'll make our lives much easier. And like Anuj mentioned,
Definitely,
this is something which is, since it is our problem, not many of them pay
of
attention to it
course,
because it's not really employee
of
experience. This is
course,
something which we need to kind of live with it and
yeah.
work it out, right?
No, I mean, I come from a very similar experience of having managed COE, and like, so I understand the kind of complexities that go into this.
Yeah.
So definitely, I hope very soon Hireshore will be able to cater to this particular problem.
Yeah, yeah. And one of the companies where I worked, what we did was, I mean, our technical team helped us in building a tool internally,
Mm-hmm.
which was pretty
Mm-hmm.
effective. But again, it had
Mm-hmm.
its own challenges, but it was good. It was much better than Excel
Mm-hmm.
sheet still played a huge role, but it kind of made our lives a little more easier. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's what my
All
take
right.
on this would be.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And let's come towards the end of the session, and I believe this will be my last question to all of you. So can you, like, we've talked about all of the compensation planning, we've talked about the appraisals and compensation philosophies. But essentially, like, what happens towards the end is, like, all the communication that happens, right? And when like evaluations are done and when appraisals are done, the most important aspect that remains is the communication. And of course, we've touched upon that, training the managers and training the department heads becomes quite essential. But beyond that, as rewards professionals, how do you think, like, what is the best way to communicate compensation decisions to the employee population at large?
Would you guys like to go first?
You can go first.
No, what I would like to ask you about is, like, transparency, which like in today's day and age, a lot of employees expect a lot of transparency to come up from the organization or from the management side. So how do you effectively address that?
I think I can probably give a couple of points from a talent management perspective. Uh, See, first and foremost thing is business will need to treat HR as an ally, right? Business and HR has to work closely. So it's very important that they communicate with each other. The leaders communicate, get the buy-in from them. If they are not comfortable with certain decisions, I mean, talk about it, communicate. It can be vice versa also. Many times HR won't be comfortable, but it's important that the communication channel is open so that they speak the same language. And once that is established, I think it's important that the communication or the top-down communication happens effectively, right? See, tough decisions are part of the process, and at the end of the day, the HR is working towards the company's benefit, and even the business is also kind of ensuring that things are in place, right? So that the company moves forward. So it's important that they understand that, right? I mean, both the parties understand that. And this is something which I see a lot of HR guys on the call. This is something which you guys would have experienced, right? I mean, if there are tough decisions, if there is something which is probably not very pleasant for the employee, managers have this tendency to put it on the HR, put the blame on the HR. Oh, this is something which the HR took a decision on. We are helpless. Avoid all that. It's important that you own up. I mean, as a leader, as a manager, it's important that you own up your decisions. Not everything can be communicated to the employee, but use your judgment, get the HR's help, ensure the communication happens properly, right? The channel has to be open because that's something which is very keen. And be transparent. To what extent is something which you got to decide, you got to get a buy-in from your leaders, or you got to ensure that how much can be communicated, get that clarity, ensure these things are communicated effectively. Stick to the process, right? I mean, appraisal process is something which most of you will agree. A lot of biases can creep in. It's important that you stick to the process, and as HR professionals, it's important that you drive it. You drive it very objectively, and no biases comes into the picture. See, I wouldn't say all these things can be achieved 100%, but it's important that how much ever possible from our end, we need to kind of drive it so that it is done in a very, very objective way. So these are few pointers which I had. Hope it makes sense.
Yeah, definitely, Joel. Thank you so much.
I think adding to it, I
Aman,
think
Anuj.
the communication is again which a very important pillar. So, like for example, this year what we did was we had a third party consultant work with us to train the managers and train the managers on how to give feedback. Now, a feedback essentially is holistic. If it talks about how your performance has been, what can you do better in the future. Next, it links to you, how do you communicate inputs on what is your performance rating is going to be, and last is in terms of the rating, what is your increment going to be. And typical traditional companies tend to put it across that put it on HR ki HR ne ye diya hai, wo diya hai. But nowadays and that was true, to be honest. I'll not say that was not true. That was true at a point of time when increments were decided centrally and department heads were given just FYI, this is the increment that's being done, you don't have a say. Not good companies, evolving companies are giving accountability to business. This is the budget, and they of course budget they can exceed, but to a limited extent. And then they are rationalizing that, and they are giving the accountability that this much I can distribute to my respective teams. Now, with that in mind, what is again more important is giving them budget is one part, but communicating to them that how do you ensure that accountability is within you and not goes out. People blame HR because see, HR doesn't interact with employees on a daily basis. The department head or a manager does. And if a manager strikes it off to a third party, then employee starts to feel that my manager has no authority over my career or my compensation, and rather than I would go somewhere where I am valued more. Unless until manager takes a full accountability and is trained enough maturely to answer that, right? This is the reason that we have done this. If you deliver A, we will go B, and all those things, and a futuristic career trajectory, and telling why something has been done for you, why your rating was ABC. There can be disagreements, but that's fair. It's better to communicate rather than leaving things on anticipation. If you leave things to anticipation, it always and always go to negative direction, and people tend to feel demotivated. So it's always better to communicate effectively, and that's the key thing, that essentially you ensure that you should be fair in any way. So one of the key element for us is fairness, right? Which is going to be the key in taking any calls, that people should feel fair. That if, let's say, Joel got a top rating and I was among the bottom 20% and Aman was a meet expectation, we all should be okay with it. I mean, because we all know how Joel has performed. That's the kind of rating it should be like. Same, if the rating is like that, your how Joel, if Joel has done well and I agree to it, he can be paid more than me, and I should be fine with that. That's the kind of transparency we ideally should go with. And then again, but that's a very very far fetched thought. Practically, it doesn't happen like that. But I think maybe for mid and senior. At Lenskart, I can definitely tell you that we are moving in that direction. We are seeing that. Junior, it's not possible at all. I don't see that. But at least for mid and senior, we are seeing that maturity happening over the due course of time.
Aman?
I think any comp decision are broadly an outcome of your individual performance as well as how the business has performed. In order to cater to any contingencies or any issues which pertains to these two factors, what we typically do at our organization is, with respect to the outcome corresponding to your individual performance, we make sure that all the people managers are having periodical feedback and the periodical connects with their reportees, so that it doesn't come as a surprise that an employee has got only, let's say, single digit increment, or the other employee has gone a very significantly high increment, because they are aware how they essentially have performed over the last 5 to 6 months and what their target essentially were, because they were having periodical conversations with their managers as well as the vertical heads. Uh, so that caters to the first element of the communication. The second thing is it's largely also a part of how the business is performing. If the business is doing really well, the business would want to appraise as well as appreciate the efforts the employees have given us. On the other hand, if the market is lukewarm or the business is not doing that well, that would certainly impact the outcome for the employee as well, even though he or she would have given his or his best in making the organization better as an IC. So in order to do that, in order to mitigate those conversations or the hurdles with respect to that, we have extensive training with our people managers to focus on what the future looks like for the employee in the organization. While company wouldn't have been able to do justice right now because of XYZ reason, the fact that it might down change as well as it may improve, what would essentially be the future outcome if the employee decides to continue in the organization. And secondly, we have a very transparent metrics that we publish every on a week-on-week basis on the entire TV screens of our organization, so that everyone is aware how the organization is doing and how what our targets are. Again, in the interest of transparency, everyone is so it doesn't come as a shocker for the employee that even though he or she was doing very well, how he or she could get only a 5 or 7% increment. Because we make sure that everyone is aware throughout the timeline. And another thing which we do in the organization is, instead of having an yearly appraisal cycle or let's say a corrective cycle in the middle, we have full-fledged two performance cycles, so that if there has been any seasonality or any let's say we had a lukewarm quarter because of which we couldn't have substantial increment budgets, uh, an employee wouldn't have to wait for another year to get corrected, even if it was a high performing employee. It helps us to an extent. A high performance employee gets retained because there's a lesser time span in order to make those corrections for them. While it's more of an operational work for the people team and for the people manager as well to pass on the feedback, but it does sort of, I would say, instead of having, let's say, 20% attrition in one work, that gets normalized over a period of time, which helps us make future decisions in a better way at NPL.
Uh, we had a few questions on the poll. I guess Anuj has answered one of the questions, and there's one more question by Ankit, who had asked a question earlier as well, and this is a follow-up question that Ankit has asked. What other methods or parameters can be used if performance ratings are delinked with appraisal percentage? That is a question by Ankit.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, I think companies have different approaches and a couple of things which you can do. I mean, if you have that uh, opportunity, right? So one is, uh, yeah. So the question over here is not linking it with your performance ratings, right? So that's what the key
Yes.
thing over here is. So one thing what you can do is you can probably look at these market-based salaries. I mean, say for example, if somebody is in a certain role, you actually have an option to like kind of take a look at how much that person is getting paid. I mean, basically your compare ratio, and determine the salary hike percentage. I mean, you take the rating part out of the equation and then you kind of decide on that so that there is a certain range which is maintained for that particular what do you call it, role. The other one would be to kind of I don't know like how much practical that would be, but I know that some companies do it. Having these cost of living adjustments, right? I mean, looking at the inflation,
Mhm.
that is also one factor which can be brought into the picture. Maybe Anuj or Aman can maybe can add in more inputs there because you guys work directly on these aspects, right? So that is another thing which companies adopt so that this aspect is taken care of. And then you can also look at the base salary increases also to an extent. Again, that will also take care of the market ranges in terms of how much that particular person or that particular role is getting paid. These are few things which you can kind of keep in mind. But again, each company is different. You gotta come up with a plan wherein depending on the company's culture, depending on the criticality of the role. I think that is something which is really important, right? So these are factors which you gotta keep in mind, and you should maybe come up with a strategy so that these things can be addressed.
All right. I guess that was quite an insightful discussion that we had, and I guess in interest of time, uh, I'll like to just have just few just last notes like or final words from each of you. Because a lot of people here are from startups and maybe coming how they'll be navigating appraisal season soon. So just few last words for the entire audience. We can start with you, Joy.
Okay. Last few words, I think one thing, if you ask me, I'm actually pretty excited in terms of how the HR function has evolved in the last probably I think especially post pandemic, right? I mean, okay, this makes me sound very old. I mean, when I started my career, I mean, HR probably was not so strategic, right? And I could actually see that evolution like over the years, and I think this probably is the right time to be, I would say, in the HR profession, and a lot of you guys are just probably starting your career in that 5 to 8 years of experience range, right? So I think it is a pretty exciting time. There is a lot of expectation from us as HR professionals. So I think the most important factor over here is it's really important that you understand the business, who and what you're supporting or the kind of work they're doing, because unless you know what kind of a business you are supporting, you may not be able to give those inputs for them, right? So it's very important you know, understand the business or understand the project or understand the business unit you're supporting so that your inputs are taken seriously. Because the moment your leaders get an impression that, okay, you understand the business or you kind of know, speak their language, speak the business language, I mean, try to understand the metrics and all that. So that is one crucial aspect, and they're gonna like take you really seriously, and you can contribute a lot. So that is probably something which I wanted to kind of highlight.
Aman.
I think while working on navigating through the appraisal system, I guess the most important underlying for every appraisal is the budget the people team is operating with. So if you're working with a decent budget that you think your HR partners think is good enough for the organization as a whole, nothing to worry about. However, if due to any exigencies or any situations that budget is not in line with what the expectation is, I would suggest have uh, I believe because market will definitely open up in a couple of months time, and there might be a possibility of having increased attrition rate than we are facing right now. To have a chest of incentives which you could utilize if you cannot provide the right amount of increment via the budget. For instance, at MPL, we have a separate budget for ESOPs as well as retention bonus, and which ideally we do a Pareto principle where we identify the top 20 or the 20% of the people who are like 80% critical for the organization. And if at all they are unhappy with the compensation they're working with, and we cannot do a lot about compensation, we use that chest of incentives if at all we want to retain them in the future. With respect to, let's say, a long-term incentive like ESOP, or a cash incentive with respect to a retention bonus, because such incentives, it may not impact your OPEX on a recurring way, but definitely can help you retain the high performers in your organization. That'll be my one key takeaway for everyone.
Anuj?
I think I'll just give 2 points. That one, regarding compensation largely rewards, people tend to think it is in HR at least one of the most objective and way to go about it. It works, but I think uh, it is more of an art rather than just the numbers, right? Numbers are just data points. How do you play around with that? How do you utilize that is something which is very, very important. Second, I will echo a similar point that already made by Joel, that learning the business is the most and the only important thing, right? HR is no rocket science. Anybody with a decent IQ can do it, right? There is no rocket science to it. The only gap that, and the reason that people actually don't get a seat at the table, they don't get respect or anything in the past, was because they were just focusing on, this is my job, I have to do this. My job is to do HR. My job is to do recruitment. My job is to do appraisal. My job is to do training, and that's my job is done there. That's not the job, right? The job is to drive business. You're owning. You're like a mini CEO or your business partner. If you're a business partner, your job is to deliver that business, delivers the revenue, no matter what, no matter how. Be it through manpower planning, be it through increments, be it through retention, be it through training. That's your job. Your job is not to do solve queries. So the most and foremost important part is to, no matter what business you support, right? You get into so much detail, understanding of that, that everything else is HR. Everybody can learn through time. I think it's not rocket science.
Right. Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you so much, Anuj, Aman, Joel, for your time. And I hope our audience gained a lot from this discussion. So thank you so much, and good day, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a
Gagi.
nice
Pleasure,
Yeah,
pleasure talking to you. Thanks,
thanks.
everyone.
Thank you. It was a great conversation.
Bye-bye.